And welcome to the Carr's Billington Proud to Farm podcast. And we're here with the second one of the year, which is number 10. So we're bringing you something special with the powerhouses of Carr's Billington knowledge and expertise, Jimmy Goldie and Alex Law. And they'll be joined by Freya Webber from Volac silage additives. And they will be having a chat around all things silage, the quality and quantity thereof, and their thoughts for the year ahead.
Bit of background on me.
Yeah, Freya, good.
Cool. So originally I am from the far north of Scotland, a wee place called Dornoch. Grew up on farmland, close relationship with the farmer there who owned the farm. And we got involved in some, the fun parts of farming, nothing too deep, but pet lambs, that kind of thing. So interest was there from an early age. And it was pretty much guaranteed that I was going to be going into something to do with animals anyway. And sure enough, I went to uni, did a degree in animal biology. And the first few years I spent kind of bouncing about, not quite sure what it was I was going to pursue, particularly in that area. But last year I came into contact with, it was my supervisor of my dissertation, and he handed me a book called Spillover, which was all about infectious disease, zoonotic disease. And yeah, thought that subject was super juicy, and that really inspired me. Went on to do a master's in infectious disease, and that was in African trypanosomiasis. Specifically, we were looking at transmission dynamics in different areas, in areas of wildlife and tourism versus livestock agriculture. And after that, I wasn't sure where I was going to apply my skill set, my niche skill set. Thought I would go and do a PhD, and in order to do that, I needed to get some experience so that I could meet the competition for that. And went out volunteering my free time to a company working in the research and development of lateral flow diagnostics for animal infectious disease, or human infectious disease, sorry. And I came out with a full-time job offer. So that was really cool, really exciting. Spent a year doing that, and it went pretty well. And the CEO then decided to set up a company focusing on animal infectious disease diagnostics. And I was invited to join the scientists there. So off I went, starting out as a scientist on the bench, and gradually over the next 5-6 years became more and more customer-facing. And commercial. And it got to the point where we were working on both companion animal and livestock diagnostics, and really what I was most interested in was that livestock side of things. And I also wanted to get out of the four walls that I was working in on the bench. So I thought I would have a look. I'd had some personal changes as well. I had the wee boy. Time seemed right to make that kind of move. Had a look at what was out there, which was fairly limited in Scotland, which was also a technical role working in livestock. So the role at Volac came up for a technical business manager for Scotland and the North. And I went for that. And a few weeks later, I had a job offer, and now 18 months ahead. I must be doing all right. I'm still there. And I've survived the last 18 months, and I'm loving what I'm doing. Focusing on livestock health. My role covering, focusing on silage additives. And as I said, for Scotland and the North, so that takes me from Orkney all the way down to North Wales, across to Yorkshire, back up. So it has been a steep learning curve, coming from, not too much depth and knowledge and understanding in this industry. Massive learning curve, but loving every moment of it, and going pretty strong. So
good. But very much focused on forage.
Very much focused on forage.
Yep.
Yes.
So forage is very important to us as well.
Yes.
In terms of what's there. We analyse something close to 7,000 forage samples a year. Mm-hmm. And every diet that we do on farm, at least 50% of that diet is forage. So forage quality, forage quantity, how we preserve forage, how we utilise forage is very, very important to us. Yep. So hence why we have a good relationship with Volac.
Yes.
And looking at that in terms of how we make silage, how we preserve forages is very important to us as a business. Yeah. I always think we get involved in it from all stages, from the ground up, and we need to look at how we improve that going forward. Mm-hmm. We're in a time just now where milk price has been reduced and things are quite tight. So looking at that, on-farm efficiency and forage utilisation is very, very important to us. So I think over the next 6 months, going into the spring, going into 2026 season of silage, I think that's something that we really need to focus on to make sure we've got good forage in the clamp and how we progress into this year. We've had challenges from last year, both from quantity and quality because of the weather. And we can probably cover that in a bit of detail, but plenty of farms are pretty short of forage this year. So we need to look at just how that works going into the spring.
Yeah. There's been pretty spectacular variation, I would say, from, as we said, Orkney all the way down to Yorkshire, and you guys go obviously further south than that as well still. And when you look west versus east, we had guys who took the weather in their stride and went with it, took their cuts early, and I got a great amount of forage from that. And then out in the east, obviously, you've got guys who have had severe droughts. So a huge difference between west and east, and certainly the area I cover as well.
Alex, soil obviously is a major part of that from the start. Is there anything we can do in terms of trying to mitigate that problem going into this spring?
Yeah, so when we're putting grass seed mixtures together, we're looking at ground cover, making sure we're not picking up any soil contamination. So there's huge factors during drought, even as much as soil dust being gathered up with silage can cause us an issue when we get to the clamp. So we're making sure cut heights are all correct. We're making sure that going back as far as soil sampling and making sure we're putting the right fertiliser on to get that right silage analysis to be able to take it forward and formulate a diet. So this spring is a lot of looking at what have people grown previously and what do they need to grow to fill their clamp going ahead. And that could be fertiliser in the spring, it could be a reseed in the summer ready for next year's silage production. So there's a lot of work goes in to preparing that forage ready for the application of additive and ensilement.
I've seen quite a bit of uptake on multi-species swards over the last couple of years. Is that something that we'll maybe benefit from in terms of some of these dry soils and the droughts that we've had? Is that something that we need to maybe take more account of or think more about?
Yeah, we do need to take more account of them. They're deeper rooted, they're pulling up more minerals and nutrients, and they're surviving the drought slightly better. I wouldn't say they're perfect in any way, but once you've got them established, they're quite a good long-term solution for being able to grow forage, particularly when some of our customers have really, really struggled to be able to grow 20% of their requirement last year. In some cases, it's been very, very serious.
Yeah, we don't know what the spring's going to bring.
We don't know what it's
going to say. That might spread the risk a little bit when we're looking at that.
And in these silages, like Jimmy says, we'll see all sorts. We see red clovers, white clovers, plantains, chicories. You know, you name it. We're analysing all sorts of forages now, and it's making sure they're preserved correctly.
Yep.
For that winter.
One concern I have is just going into the spring, if milk prices continue to be low, is just looking at spend over the whole business. But looking at fertiliser in particular, I think from my perspective, it's an area we probably don't want to save money on because we want to make the most of forage. We need to grow the forage. Alex, have you got any comment on fertiliser use?
Fertiliser use is ensuring you're buying the right product for the soil, that it requires the right nutrients, and that your end result is what your expected yield is determined by how much fertiliser you put on. So the correct usage, correct amount is applied, and with that, to gain the right forage. At the same time, there's no point putting a lot of fertiliser on a poor grass lay and not getting the production from it. So being able to actually go onto a farm and look at all the fields, walk those fields, talk to people about what they're trying to grow and what they're trying to achieve. And perhaps this year they need to focus on different areas of the farm to produce that quality forage. So again, taking that soil sample is probably the best piece of advice, and talking to us about what they require to be able to grow the crop is the biggest financial saving they'll make on fertiliser.
And probably taking a slurry analysis as well. We rely quite heavily on slurry as a nutrient, but we need to know what that is as well to make sure that that's balanced out with the fertiliser that we're putting on.
And that can be slurry, farmyard manure, pig manures, poultry manures. We can input all that information and work out what is already available on the farm going forward.
What we then need to look at is what we get as that crop, and then how we turn that into silage. One thing that I get asked quite often is about multi-cut. Should we be looking at multiple crops? But there's a cost to making every cut of silage. Should that be multi-cut, or should we reduce that back to 2 or 3 cuts on the farm? I don't know, Freya, have you got some thoughts on multi-cut?
So Volac have done extensive research, trial data, etc. And one of those trials that they've done several on it, is looking at what you'll get from a multi-cut system versus your traditional 3 cuts. And what they demonstrated is that you're essentially every time cutting younger, less mature grass, which is going to provide a higher quality at the end of the day. And be that over 5 cuts, you're getting more ME basically from every cut that you're getting. And altogether, difference between your multi-cut and your traditional 3 cut was something like over 18,000 megajoule per hectare that you're cutting. So you're getting that additional energy there, and it all boils down to, that ideal point at which you're going to cut your grass, the ideal point between your yield and your quality. And when you look at the composition of how grass changes as it matures, you'll see that, yes, your sugars go up, but your proteins come down. And then your ADF fractions, which is the bulk, they increase as well. That essentially means the animal is not going to be able to eat as much. The NDF is also going up. That is the less digestible fraction. So yeah, your sugars are going up, but less of it's digestible, less of it's going to be seen by the animal. So you really want to hit a sweet spot. And you're going to do that by doing a multi-cut system. And the other benefit that brings is that you are promoting better regrowth. And ultimately, you will get more quantity as well over the season, rather than just going with the traditional 3-cut system.
So, Jimmy, do you want to tell me a little bit about pre-cut testing then that you would offer at Carr's Billington?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite important. It's getting the balance right of everything in terms of what we're trying to achieve, and looking at what we're cutting. What we're going to cut is quite important as well. And we can do a pre-cut test probably about 2 weeks before we think we might want to test. And it's looking at some of the parameters you've just mentioned, looking at protein levels, as the nitrogen that we've applied been used up. And equally, that fertiliser application is quite important to make sure we match that with our cutting times as well. Then the other main thing we look at is the fibre, measuring the NDF and looking at how that changes over that couple of weeks' time. And we know that it gets to a point and then increases quite dramatically.
Yeah. And
the ideal is to cut the grass literally before the NDF starts to rise, and that's getting the best quality of grass and hopefully the right quantity as well. So yeah, we're quite happy to offer that and look at that, say, approximately 2 weeks before we think we're going to cut, and then that gives us a little bit of indication of what we're trying to aim, that hopefully that grass coming into the clamp is going to be an ideal condition.
Yeah.
And what do you generally see in a dry spell then, Jimmy, if the fertiliser maybe hasn't been used, or what are you seeing in the analysis?
Yeah, the grass is under a little bit of stress, so it doesn't necessarily have taken up all the nitrogen that's there, and it depends. It's quite critical what the weather is during that 2 weeks then, because if it's dry, the nitrogen's not taken up, so we can tend to end up getting lower protein silages because the nitrogen hasn't converted into protein. But if it rains in between, we can then have a rapid uptake of nitrogen, and that can change everything. So we end up with a lot of nitrogen, but which has not necessarily been converted into protein. So that becomes a bit of a problem when we look at fermenting that grass.
Yeah. I think as well, when you have those environmental conditions, often the grass will go straight to heading.
Yep.
And as soon as you move beyond heading, you're losing ME and you're losing 0.5 digestibility every day. So it's really important that we do get it before then. But yeah, we're always thrown some spanners.
And that's why when we're formulating grass seed mixtures, we're pulling the heading dates as tightly as possible. But I need to know whether it's a multi-cut system or a 3-cut system, or maybe it's depending on what the requirements
because that's what
are.
I was just going to add into what Freya said as well, is it comes back to the grass seed mixture that we need to look at. What we need to set off, are we doing multi-cut? So the grass sward then has to match what we're wanting to do. Is there anything particular you would put in that sward, Alex?
Well, we kind of, it's very, very dependent on the rotation on the farm as well, and whether they're going to be, some farms will be ploughing every couple of years and putting a fresh sward in of Italians and maybe hybrids. Others are putting more perennial ryegrasses in. Some are putting a longer term sward in with the likes of your fescues, tall fescues, which have good rooting abilities, but you're not going to wanting to plough those up every 2 or 3 years. So it's dependent on what the system is as to what we actually were putting into those mixtures and making sure all those heading dates.
Can you explain heading dates a little bit more in terms of how that looks in terms of a grass sward? Because I think it's fundamental to this in terms of looking at that multi-species sward.
Yeah.
For the multi-cuts, that we're looking at getting the heading dates right.
So we're trying to nip up that heading date as close as we possibly can. So a heading date is when that plant goes to seed or it flowers, that it appears. And as Freya said, we're wanting to cut just before that. Now, the heading date will depend on whereabouts you are in the country as well. So it's a fairly general rule of thumb, but the breeders will know a heading date, and it will be in the recommended list when it will head. And we try and pull those or the varieties together to get a suitable set of varieties in the mixture with the closest heading date. But we also have to consider your yields for filling the clamp. So it's first and foremost, we're looking at varieties for yield and qualities, etc. And then we're mixing those varieties up to keep those heading dates nice and tight. A beef and sheep farm, we probably extend those heading dates slightly because they maybe only want a grazing with sheep and lambs in the spring is their first cut. Their second cut is their silage, their fodder for the following winter, and then grazing afterwards. So we don't need it as tight on the heading date. So it's dependent on what the grass seed mixture is going to be used for. It gets more complicated when we go into multi-species swards and trying to get things that will grow and cut in a. And I think the one thing we're learning from multi-species swards is they can't take the hammer of a 4-cut system where we're cutting it very, very short. It needs regrowth. It needs 4 inches of stubble to be able to continue its.
Yeah, but as Freya said, if we cut it not too low and cut it early, we tend to get that regrowth quite well, which helps. But it's then looking at that interval, if it's going to be cut again in 4 weeks potentially, we need to think about what that sward's going to grow like and what fertiliser and stuff we put onto it as well so that we get the most out of it, but not overdoing it because we know that then becomes challenges in terms of preserving it.
Yeah, and nitrogen and sulphur are important in that protein building of that grass as well. So it's knowing what the requirements of those different vegetation types are for making your clamp of silage or your bales of silage.
And I think it's sometimes starting at the end point that we want high protein silage but stable in the clamp. We want the ME that you said, Freya, we want that high ME from the multi-cut, and it's getting that balance right so that we've got the grass fed, the right grass sward, the nutrients there that we can then get decent forage that we've got for the animal. Do you want to talk, Freya, a little bit about making silage in terms of cutting to clamp, in terms of how we preserve that and what's the best way to achieve that in the clamp for the cows?
Yeah, we can do that. So I guess first step is cutting. And as we've touched on, that when we're going to cut will depend on the season. This year, a lot of people went a week early, didn't they? And that worked out really well in the West anyway, when just with the weather patterns that we had after that. So when we're cutting, we want to think about when we're going to do it, when are we going to get that optimum quality, but also the yield. And we then want to, moving on to wilting, try and get to, in your high productivity systems, we're talking about a percentage dry matter of between 28 to 32 being optimal. And the aim being to get to that percentage as quick as possible within 24 hours, really. And the importance of that being that the longer you leave your cut forage out there, the more opportunity you're giving spoilage organisms a chance to proliferate on those swards that are lying there. And I think the research that we've done at Volac shows that come 24 hours, you're looking at going from 0 to around 1 million spoilage organisms on that sward. Add another 12 hours to that, and you're looking at over 3 million. So that difference in time is really important. So wilt to that percentage as quick as possible. We then want to think about things like your chop length as you're harvesting it, because the chop length will have implications for both animal health and also for consolidation in the clamp. And really it's going to be dictated by that dry matter. The higher the dry matter, the shorter you want that chop length, so that when you come to consolidating it in the clamp, you can really get all of that oxygen out. And then we want to consider whether we're using silage additive, yes or no, and the pros and cons around that, which we can detail more after. Then you're talking about getting it into the clamp. So with clamping, we want to be preparing that well before harvest. We want to make sure that we've got everything there to, once the oxygen is out, keep that oxygen out. So we're talking about your side sheets, your cling, your oxygen impermeable barrier, and then your top sheet as well. With your side sheets, I've seen a lot recently of clamps without them. It's about that oxygen. Your clamps are breathable, but also your concrete. You want to protect your concrete. You want lactic acid to be there. The lactic acid will start eating away at your concrete. So protect what you've got there. And you want to make sure as well that you've got adequate weight on the top. You've done all this work trying to get the oxygen out. Let's keep it out. Put as much weight on the top as possible.
I've seen a few indoor clamps lately with straw in the top.
And
that makes a really big difference to it, and you get very minimal waste on the top. If you can only do that with an inside clamp, obviously, but it's a pretty good way of doing it.
Makes a big difference, so doesn't it? And you want to keep that clamp clean. You don't want to give any opportunity for there to be any contamination brought into what's there. And when it comes to feeding out as well, you want to make sure that you are keeping that clamp face nice and neat. So one, if you can use your shear grab, use your shear grab. There's people who have a shear grab, but it's away in storage and they've not brought it out. Please use it. When you use a bucket or anything else, you damage the integrity of the clamp face, basically, and you're making that oxygen ingress easier to happen. So, when you're feeding out, keep that integrity of your clamp face. And I mean that is a summary of the process, I guess.
Okay, I think speed of clamp fill is quite important as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want it to fill as quick as possible.
Field to sealed, soon as possible.
Yeah, but I think also the nature of putting that in, the consolidation becomes quite important, because sometimes it comes in too fast, and the consolidation's a bit poor just because of the speed that it's coming in, and it's it's getting that balance. We know we want it in as quick as possible, but it's getting that consolidation at clamp level that it's right as well. So can I pick up on something else that both of you have talked about is soil contamination, and one thing that I always look at in a silage analysis is the ash content, and I think we can read a couple of things into that. One, in terms of the soil contamination at the beginning, in terms of cut height. You said even in drought we've sometimes got straight contamination in soil, and also if we've got late slurry application. I think that's one thing that has a both of them, I think, can have a major effect. One thing I'm a bit paranoid about is feeding high ash silage or hay to sheep.
Yes.
Because we've got a higher risk of listeriosis. So I think it's always something just to keep a note in. A lot of silages tend to be about 7.5% to 8% ash. But if we see any that are up towards 10% ash, that tends to be a feeding problem and a conserving problem.
Yeah, certainly.
And a lot of that can just be the way the rake's set up when they're growing it up. Too aggressive, just catching a little bit of soil or a little bit of dust and bringing it in. I saw, molehills, common, that can be a common thing. Slurry applications, of course, or manure applications where we haven't managed to get enough rainfall to wash the contamination off the leaf and actually get it down into the bottom. But even to the point this year, further south where we've had drought, we're seeing round bales with mould around the outside. And when you talk to the person who's made the bales, they've wrapped them in a dusty yard, and the bales were covered in dust when we wrapped them. There's contamination from dust off yards in front of clamps, blowing up onto clamps. You see all sorts of layers of different... I think that's where the silage additive, the use of, really comes into its own as well. Like, contamination is such a difficult thing to avoid. And naturally, on what's out there when it's wilting and things like that, you're going to have these populations of other microbes that you ultimately don't want to be in charge of the process. Then you've got the soil coming in with it, or your slurry and your manure application being problematic too. So you really want to take charge of what bug's going to be doing the job, and that is what you're essentially doing by using your additive. But it's not a solution to get rid of that problem.
No, it's absolutely not. No, you can't. You can't get rid of what is in there.
So it must be considered. If you think you've got a problem, try and stop the problem. The additive of any kind will not solve that and get rid of it.
One of the other risks I see with multi-cut is clamps sliding. So we see clamps going in, hopefully followed all the instructions that you've already given, but then it tends to slip out of the clamp.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit to do with dry matter, a little bit to do with fibre, but I'm not sure if you've got any other comments to add to that, Freya.
It's young grass, it's leafier, and it's more supple. So it can be more prone to that slippage, as you've described it. And I mean, the best things, one thing we can consider is the clamp structure. You do see some almighty clamps, which could do with some rethink on how they're set up exactly. But we've also got to think about, when we're using a multi-cut system, things that'll help. So your chop length cutting a little bit longer, so that you've got that integrity between.
When you're saying longer, what do you mean by that? 25 mil or?
It does depend on your dry matter,
Yep.
but when you're talking about like your 30% plus dry matters, that's when you want to be at your shortest, your up to 2.5 kind of centimeters. And then if you're working with anything 20% below, you're talking 10 centimeters, just to ensure that all knits together in there. And it's also really important to make sure that the layers, as you're putting them in, are even. You don't want a thick layer, a thin layer, and mixed depth. So we say, general rule of thumb, 15 centimeter layers, and compact it evenly. So if you're spending half an hour with the right amount of weight on each layer, then it's all going to have roughly the same amount of compaction. Keep that as even as possible.
And I think we kind of underestimate how important that consolidation is. I think doing it in layers is so important. Somebody once told me that if you put a layer of eggs 30 centimetres below the surface, you wouldn't break them, because when you're consolidating with a tractor, albeit a fairly large tractor, you're not getting much below 30 centimetres, so it needs to be in that thin layers so that we're getting that good consolidation. And I know I see quite a number of clamps where the consolidation is really good, and you see very, very minimal waste in the clamp throughout, and then you see other ones that the consolidation isn't perfect, and it's a significant amount of waste. No, that waste costs money. And I think that's the important thing. If we're looking at how we can save money going forward, I think that's one area that we need to really concentrate on. And we think silage is silage, but it's expensive crop to make, and we need to make sure that we make it as best we can, and make sure we minimise that amount of waste, because all that waste is, we've spent a lot of money making that waste.
What about covering the clamp between, if the contractor runs into a couple of days, Jimmy? Do you?
Good question, Alex. It's not me that's doing it. So, in an ideal world, if we can keep the oxygen out of that, if we can put it on put a sheet over the top of it, it would be best. You go out the next morning, you see it. If it hasn't been, especially if it's been left for a couple of days because of weather, it hasn't got the same surface on it. There's already deterioration in that silage. So the theoretical answer, the correct answer is you would cover it overnight if you could, but I've thrown many a tire in my year, and it's not something that I would necessarily say that it's a must, but there's definitely a benefit from doing that.
So tell us a little bit about Ecosile, and actually the application process of how we get it onto, because I always think it's fascinating how we get such a small amount of an additive onto a forage. So if we were using a forage harvester, how do you get it on and get the coverage?
Well, the beauty of Ecosile is that it's got a really versatile application rate. So the standard application would be your 2 litres per tonne application, but you can do that all the way down to ultra low volume, 20 mils per tonne. And you'll get your additive in a bottle. It comes as a powder or liquid application, and you will add X amount of water into the bottle to the fill lines, give it a shake to dissolve it up, and then you pop that into your applicator tank, top that up, and then that's it, ready to go and be applied at whichever rate it is that you are going to select for.
It's just drizzled into the forage harvester spout.
You've got all your gadgets and gizmos now these days, so you put it into the computer and it's
away it goes.
Away it goes.
And you're getting you're getting a coverage on all that grass.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
So do you want to explain a bit more of the process of the bugs in there and how it actually operates and what it does after we've sprayed it on, how Alex has nicely described that?
Yeah, so I guess there's various stages obviously to your ensilement process, but you spray it on And then you're getting your stuff in, which you have put in your nice even layers. You've consolidated it. And eventually, when your clamp is ready to be sealed, it is sealed, and you have an aerobic phase where there is still some oxygen present, be it as you may have tried your damnedest to get that oxygen out, there still will be some in there. So you have an aerobic stage that will last from a couple of hours to a couple of days. And once that aerobic stage is over, you then enter the fermentation stage. And that is when you are going to have your lactic acid bacteria, which you have added in with your spraying, converting the sugars that are there into lactic acid. And by cherry picking your additives, if you use something that has a homofermentative bacteria like your MTD1 in Ecosile, that will convert sugar really efficiently into lactic acid. So for every mole of sugar, you're getting 2 lactic acid. So really conservative use, creating as much lactic as you can in that time period and dropping that pH as fast as possible. And the aim is to typically get that pH between 3.8 and 4.2. It does depend on your dry matter. A wetter silage can be lower in pH, a drier higher. That's typically what we'd consider stable, and at the pH at which you're going to inhibit those microorganisms that are unwanted. So your Clostridia from soil contamination or your Enterobacteria from slurry. And basically, you'll pickle what you've got there and make conditions unfavourable for anything else to become established and start eating away at the quality and the quantity of your forage there.
You mentioned sugar. How important sugar, and can we influence the amount of sugar that the grass has before we put it in the clamp?
Well, again, comes down to cutting date. That'll have an effect on how much sugar is there. Obviously, the more mature it is, the sugar builds up. And I think typically they say you're looking for about 3% in order to guarantee a sufficient amount of sugar being there for a good fermentation to occur. Obviously, that is what is feeding those bacteria. So, yeah, we do need that sugar there. And typically, or not typically, but you can see that because you've got that efficient use of sugar converted into lactic, you can have still some levels of sugar left there, and that is good for the palatability intake of your silage as well.
So if we take a silage that's a lot drier, for example, in dry conditions, and the dry matter is a dry product, let's say, or a whole crop or a maize, what are you able to offer us for those situations, and how do they work?
Those are, so your maize, for example, very high starch crop, and you'll see lots more starch versus little protein, and that is the trade-off you're seeing there. So it's a high energy crop, and that sugar there will help drive, obviously, the fermentation by the lactic acid bacteria that have been either there naturally occurring or that you've put on with your inoculant, but also feed through to provision of energy to your livestock.
And for that, we'd use EcoCool.
For something like maize, you could use EcoCool, or you could use double action EcoCorn.
EcoCorn,
yeah. So the difference between those two products is your EcoCool has got a second bacteria in it. So it's got your MTD1 to drive that fermentation, but also a Buchneri, which is a heterofermentative bacteria. It'll produce acetic acid, and that acetic acid helps with controlling of your yeast activity and also your mold growth as well after that. That, I guess, perfect if you're organic farming and that's what your considerations are. But if you are not, you can also consider double action EcoCorn, which has got a chemical preservative in it in place of that Buchneri. And I guess that's also important as well when you're thinking about how quickly you're going to be getting into that clamp. There's an awful lot of people asking this year, how quickly can I get in there? And you need to consider that bacteria are going to take time to produce the acetic acid that is required to control the aerobic spoilage. Whereas if you're using a chemical preservative, that is going to work as soon as you put that on there.
So what is your recommendation for both in terms of difference? How many hours can I go in and open the clamp after I've put it in?
I wouldn't like to give you hours.
how many days?
To get the best response and result from your silage with your bacterial inoculants, you really want to be leaving that 4 to 6 weeks. We'd recommend that for both Ecosile and Eco to get the best response, but you can still open your clamp earlier if needed. But if you are really, our time is of the essence, I would recommend a chemical additive as well in there if you can.
Yeah, because I know it's really important that we keep the clamp shut as long as we can, but in certain circumstances we need to open it quite quickly. So it's something we need to take account of. So yeah that's good. I'm going to ask one last question because I think it's quite important. We're all cost conscious, and we need to look at that in terms of additive. We think additive costs money, and there's a temptation to say, well, because things are under pressure, we shouldn't use an additive in silage this year.
Yeah.
Give me very quickly, how much do we benefit financially on putting an additive on?
Okay, there's two ways we can look at it. It's maybe not going to be very, very quickly. But so again, we've got reams of research here, but when you take your 1,000-ton clamp at a 30% dry matter, and you don't treat what you put in there, but your clamp management's really good, you're looking at losing about 10% of what you've put in. Yep. Versus if you do treat it with Ecosile, you're going to halve those losses. So it works out as if you put 300 tons in, if you don't treat it, you're going to get 271 tons out. If you do treat it, you're going to get 284 tons out. So you're getting a 13-ton difference in quantity. And then when you look at the quality of that, on average, your untreated is 10.6 ME versus your treated, which is 11.3 ME. So you've got a 0.7 difference in ME. When you do all of the sums for what you get out energy-wise, you're looking at getting like 330,000 megajoules more by treating. 40% of that goes to milk production, 135,000 megajoules overall, and that's about 25,000 litres of milk in a 1,000-ton clamp.
Yep.
So great to look at the numbers that way, but then if you're going to look at it cost benefit wise, you're 1 ton of silage is going to feed 25 high yielders, 40 kilograms. Yep. Our research shows you'll get 1.2 litres additional milk per cow per day. So that works out at 30 litres benefit per ton of forage. Milk price, okay, varied just now, some really low and some not too bad, but say it's 30 pence. Then we're talking at about £9 benefit per tonne of your silage. Take off the cost of your additive, which is £1.38, £7.62. Times that by 1,000, 7,000 odd pounds benefit from treating your silage. So huge cost benefit. And it's not only the milk that we're talking about, it's then being able to, you could feed less good quality silage and maintain all the other factors, or you could feed that and more and reduce your concentrate use, which again is that is buying anything in like that is a big cost. That helps you save your costs that way.
Yeah, and if we want to make more out of forage, more milk from forage, that's a good way to think about it in terms of, in quite significant numbers there, in terms of what we can make out of it. So
and a lot of farmers would like 10% extra forage in their clamp at this time of year.
Exactly. So if we can preserve it better, make sure that we're not getting the waste, then it works all very well.
10's conservative, 15 is probably the number.
Exactly. Yeah. So all makes sense. So good. Freya, thanks very much. Alex, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So wow, great discussion there. Plenty of topics covered. We hope you've had a few takeaways from that. Thanks again for listening. Please like, share and subscribe.